双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Clotelle, A Tale of the Southern States, by William Wells Brown. Chapter 1. The Slave's Social Circle. With the growing population in the southern states, the increase of mulattoes has been very great. Society does not frown upon the man who sits with his half-white child upon his knee whilst the mother stands, a slave, behind his chair. In nearly all the cities and towns of the slave states, the real Negro, or clear black, does not amount to more than 1 in 4 of the slave population. This fact is of itself the best evidence of the degraded and immoral condition of the relation of master and slave. Throughout the southern states, there is a class of slaves who, in most of the towns, are permitted to hire their time from their owners, and who are always expected to pay a high price. This class is the mulatto women, distinguished for their fascinating beauty. The handsomest of these usually pay the greatest amount for their time. Many of these women are the favorites of men of property and standing, who furnish them with the means of compensating their owners. And not a few are dressed in the most extravagant manner. When we take into consideration the fact that no safeguard is thrown around virtue, and no inducement held out to slave women to be pure and chaste, we will not be surprised when told that immorality and vice pervade the cities and towns of the South to an extent unknown in the northern states. Indeed, many of the slave women have no higher aspiration than that of becoming the finely dressed mistress of some white man. At Negro balls and parties, this class of women usually make the most splendid appearance, and are eagerly sought after in the dance, or to entertain in the drawing room or at the table. A few years ago, among the many slave women in Richmond, Virginia, who hired their time of their masters, was Agnes, a mulatto owned by John Graves, Esq., and who might be heard boasting that she was the daughter of an American senator. Although nearly 40 years of age at the time of which we write, Agnes was still exceedingly handsome, more than half white, with long black hair and deep blue eyes. No one felt like disputing with her when she urged her claim to her relationship with the Anglo-Saxon. In her younger days, Agnes had been a housekeeper for a young slaveholder, and in sustaining this relation had become the mother of 2 daughters. After being cast aside by this young man, the slave woman betook herself to the business of a laundress, and was considered to be the most tasteful woman in Richmond at her vocation. Isabella and Marion, the 2 daughters of Agnes, resided with their mother, and gave her what aid they could in her business. The mother, however, was very choice of her daughters, and would allow them to perform no labor that would militate against their ladylike appearance. Agnes early resolved to bring up her daughters as ladies, as she termed it. As the girls grew older, the mother had to pay a stipulated price for them per month. Her notoriety as a laundress of the first class enabled her to put an extra charge upon the linen that passed through her hands, and although she imposed little or no work upon her daughters, she was enabled to live in comparative luxury and have her daughters dressed to attract attention, especially at the Negro balls and parties. Although the term Negro ball is applied to these gatherings, yet a large portion of the men who attend them are whites. Negro balls and parties in the southern states, especially in the cities and towns, are usually made up of quadroon women, a few Negro men, and any number of white gentlemen. These are gatherings of the most democratic character. Bankers, merchants, lawyers, doctors, and their clerks and students all take part in these social assemblies upon terms of perfect equality. The father and son not unfrequently meet and dance alike at a Negro ball. It was at one of these parties that Henry Linwood, the son of a wealthy and retired gentleman of Richmond, was first introduced to Isabella, the oldest daughter of Agnes. The young man had just returned from Harvard College, where he had spent the previous 5 years. Isabella was in her 18th year, and was admitted by all who knew her to be the handsomest girl, colored or white, in the city. On this occasion, she was attired in a sky-blue silk dress, with deep black lace flounces, and Bertha of the same. On her well-molded arms she wore massive gold bracelets, while her rich black hair was arranged at the back in broad basket plaits, ornamented with pearls, and the front in the French style, a la impératrice, which suited her classic face to perfection. Marian was scarcely less richly dressed than her sister. Henry Linwood paid great attention to Isabella, which was looked upon with gratification by her mother, and became a matter of general conversation with all present. Of course, the young man escorted the beautiful quadroon home that evening, and became the favorite visitor at the house of Agnes. It was on a beautiful moonlight night in the month of August, when all who reside in tropical climates are eagerly grasping for a breath of fresh air, that Henry Linwood was in the garden which surrounded Agnes' cottage, with the young quadroon by his side. He drew from his pocket a newspaper wet from the press, and read the following advertisement. Notice: 79 Negroes will be offered for sale on Monday, September 10th, at 12 o'clock, being the entire stock of the late John Graves in an excellent condition, and all warranted against the common vices. Among them are several mechanics, able-bodied field hands, plowboys, and women with children, some of them very prolific, affording a rare opportunity for anyone who wishes to raise a strong and healthy lot of servants for their own use. Also several mulatto girls of rare personal qualities, two of these very superior. Among the above slaves advertised for sale were Agnes and her 2 daughters. Ere young Linwood left the quadroon that evening, he promised her that he would become her purchaser, and make her free and her own mistress. Mr. Graves had long been considered not only an excellent and upright citizen of the first standing among the whites, but even the slaves regarded him as one of the kindest of masters. Having inherited his slaves with the rest of his property, he became possessed of them without any consultation or wish of his own. He would neither buy nor sell slaves, and was exceedingly careful, in letting them out, that they did not find oppressive and tyrannical masters. No slave speculator ever dared to cross the threshold of this planter of the Old Dominion. He was a constant attendant upon religious worship, and was noted for his general benevolence. The American Bible Society, the American Tract Society, and the cause of foreign missions found in him a liberal friend. He was always anxious that his slaves should appear well on the Sabbath, and have an opportunity of hearing the word of God. Chapter 2. The Negro Sale. As might have been expected, the day of sale brought an unusually large number together to compete for the property to be sold. Farmers, who make a business of raising slaves for the market, were there, and slave traders, who make a business of buying human beings in the slave-raising states and taking them to the far south, were also in attendance. Men and women, too, who wished to purchase for their own use, had found their way to the slave sale. In the midst of the throne was one who felt a deeper interest in the result of the sale than any other of the bystanders. This was young Linwood, true to his promise. He was there with a blank bank check in his pocket, awaiting with impatience to enter the list as a bidder for the beautiful slave. It was indeed a heart-rending scene to witness the lamentations of these slaves, all of whom had grown up together on the old homestead of Mr. Graves, and who had been treated with great kindness by that gentleman during his life. Now they were to be separated, and form new relations and companions. Such is the precarious condition of the slave. Even when with a good master, there is no certainty of his happiness in the future. The less valuable slaves were first placed upon the auction block, one after another, and sold to the highest bidder. Husbands and wives were separated with a degree of indifference that is unknown in any other relation in life. Brothers and sisters were torn from each other, and mothers saw their children for the last time on earth. It was late in the day, and when the greatest number of persons were thought to be present, when Agnes and her daughters were brought out to the place of sale. The mother was first put upon the auction block, and sold to a noted Negro trader named Jennings. Marian was next ordered to ascend the stand, which she did with a trembling step, and was sold for $1,200. All eyes were now turned on Isabella, as she was led forward by the auctioneer. The appearance of the handsome quadroon caused a deep sensation among the crowd. There she stood, with a skin as fair as most white women, her features as beautifully regular as any of her sex of pure Anglo-Saxon blood, her long black hair done up in the neatest manner, her form tall and graceful, and her whole appearance indicating one superior to her condition. The auctioneer commenced by saying that Miss Isabella was fit to deck the drawing-room of the finest mansion in Virginia. How much, gentlemen, for this real albino, fit fancy girl for anyone? She enjoys good health, and has a sweet temper. How much do you say? $500. Only $500 for such a girl as this? Gentlemen, she is worth a deal more than that sum. You certainly do not know the value of the article you are bidding on. Here, gentlemen, I hold in my hand a paper certifying that she has a good moral character. 700. Ah, gentlemen, that is something like. This paper also states that she is very intelligent. 800. She was first sprinkled, then immersed, and is now warranted to be a devoted Christian, and perfectly trustworthy. $900. 950. 1,000. 1,100. Here the bidding came to a dead stand. The auctioneer stopped, looked around, and began in a rough manner to relate some anecdote connected with the sale of slaves, which he said had come under his own observation. At this juncture the scene was indeed a most striking one. The laughing, joking, swearing, smoking, spitting, and talking kept up a continual hum and confusion among the crowd, while the slave girl stood with tearful eyes, looking alternately at her mother and sister and toward the young man whom she hoped would become her purchaser. The chastity of this girl, now, continued the auctioneer, is pure. She has never been from under her mother's care. She is virtuous, and as gentle as a dove. The bids here took a fresh start, and went on until $1,800 was reached. The auctioneer once more resorted to his jokes, and concluded by assuring the company that Isabella was not only pious, but that she could make an excellent prayer. $1,900. 2,000. This was the last bid, and the quadroon girl was struck off, and became the property of Henry Linwood. This was a Virginia slave auction, at which the bones, sinews, blood, and nerves of a young girl of 18 were sold for $500, her moral character for $200, her superior intellect for $100, the benefits supposed to accrue from her having been sprinkled and immersed, together with a warranty of her devoted Christianity, for $300, her ability to make a good prayer for $200, and her chastity for $700 more. This, too, in a city thronged with churches, whose tall spires look like so many signals pointing to heaven, but whose ministers preach that slavery a God-ordained institution. The slaves were speedily separated and taken along by their respective masters. Jennings, the slave speculator, who had purchased Agnes and her daughter Marian, with several of the other slaves, took them to the county prison, where he usually kept his human cattle after purchasing them, previous to starting for the New Orleans market. Linwood had already provided a place for Isabella, to which she was taken. The most trying moment for her was when she took leave of her mother and sister. The goodbye of the slave is unlike that of any other class in the community. It is indeed a farewell forever. With tears streaming down their cheeks, they embraced and commended each other to God, who is no respecter of persons, and before whom master and slave must one day appear. Chapter 3. The Slave Speculator. Dick Jennings, the slave speculator, was one of the few northern men who go to the South and throw aside their honest mode of obtaining a living and resort to trading in human beings. A more repulsive-looking person could scarcely be found in any community of bad-looking men. Tall, lean and lank, with high cheekbones, face much pitted with the smallpox, gray eyes with red eyebrows, and sandy whiskers. He indeed stood alone without mate or fellow in looks. Jennings prided himself upon what he called his goodness of heart and was always speaking of his humanity. As many of the slaves whom he intended taking to the New Orleans market had been raised in Richmond and had relations there, he determined to leave the city early in the morning, so as not to witness any of the scenes so common the departure of a slave gang to the far south. In this, he was most successful, for not even Isabella, who had called at the prison several times to see her mother and sister, was aware of the time that they were to leave. The slave trader started at early dawn, and was beyond the confines of the city long before the citizens were out of their beds. As a slave regards a life on the sugar or rice plantation as even worse than death, they are ever on the watch for an opportunity to escape. The trader, aware of this, secures his victims in chains before he sets out on his journey. On this occasion, Jennings had the men chained in pairs, while the women were allowed to go unfastened, but were closely watched. After a march of 8 days, the company arrived on the banks of the Ohio River, where they took a steamer for the place of their destination. Jennings had already advertised in the New Orleans papers that he would be there with a prime lot of able-bodied slaves, men and women, fit for field service, with a few extra ones calculated for house servants, all between the ages of 15 and 25 years. But like most men who make a business of speculating in human beings, he often bought many who were far advanced in years, and would try to pass them off for 5 or 6 years younger than they were. Few persons can arrive at anything approaching the real age of the Negro by mere observation, unless they are well acquainted with the race. Therefore, the slave trader frequently carried out the deception with perfect impunity. After the steamer had left the wharf and was fairly out on the bosom of the broad Mississippi, the speculator called his servant Pompey to him, and instructed him as to getting the Negroes ready for market. Among the 40 slaves that the trader had on this occasion were some whose appearance indicated that they had seen some years and had gone through considerable service. Their gray hair and whiskers at once pronounced them to be above the ages set down in the trader's advertisement. Pompey had long been with Jennings, and understood his business well, and if he did not take delight in the discharge of his duty, he did it at least with a degree of alacrity, so that he might receive the approbation of his master. Pomp, as he was usually called by the trader, was of real Negro blood, and would often say, when alluding to himself, "Dis nigger am no counterfeit. He is de genuine article. Dis chili is none of your half and half. Dere is no bogus about him." Pompey was of low stature, round face, and, like most of his race, had a set of teeth, which, for whiteness and beauty, could not be surpassed. His eyes were large, lips thick, and hair short and woolly. Pompey had been with Jennings so long, and had seen so much of buying and selling of his fellow creatures, that he appeared perfectly indifferent to the heart-rending scenes which daily occurred in his presence. Such is the force of habit. Vice is a monster of such frightful mien, that to be hated needs but to be seen, but seen too oft. Familiar with its face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. It was on the 2nd day of the steamer's voyage that Pompey selected 5 of the oldest slaves, took them into a room by themselves, and commenced preparing them for the market. "Now," said he, addressing himself to the company, "I is de chap dat is to get you ready for da Orleans market, so dat you will bring Mosser a good price. How old is you?" Addressing himself to a man not less than 40. "If I live to see next sweet potato digging time, I shall be either 40 or 45. I don't know which." "Dat may be," replied Pompey, "but now you is only 30 years old. Dat's what Mosser says you is to be." "I know I is more den dat," responded the man. "I can't help nothin' about dat," returned Pompey. "But when you get into de market and anyone asks you how old you is, and you tell him you is 40 or 45, Mosser will tie you up and cut you all to pieces. But if you tell 'ern dat you is only 30, den he won't. Now remember that you is 30 years old, and no more. Well den, I guess I will only be 30 when they ask me. What's your name? Said Pompey, addressing himself to another. James. Oh, Uncle Jim. Is it? Yes. Den you must have all them gray whiskers shaved off, and all dem gray hairs plucked out of your head. This was all said by Pompey in a manner which showed that he knew what he was about. How old is you? Asked Pompey of a tall, strong-looking man. What's your name? I am 29 years old, and my name is Tobias, but they calls me Toby. Well, Toby, or Mr. Tobias, if that will suit you better. You are now 23 years old. That's all. Do you understand that? Yes, replied Toby. Pompey now gave them all to understand how old they were to be when asked by persons who were likely to purchase, and then went and reported to his master that the old boys were all right. Be sure, said Jennings, that the niggers don't forget what you have taught them, for our luck this time in the market depends upon their appearance. If any of them have so many gray hairs that you cannot pluck them out, take the blacking and brush, and go at them. Chapter 4. The Boat Race. At 8 o'clock, on the evening of the third day of the passage, the lights of another steamer were soon in the distance, and apparently coming up very fast. This was the signal for a general commotion on board the Patriot, and everything indicated that a steamboat race was at hand. Nothing can exceed the excitement attendant upon the racing of steamers on the Mississippi. By the time the boats had reached Memphis, they were side by side, and each exerting itself to get in advance of the other. The night was clear, the moon shining brightly, and the boats so near to each other that the passengers were within speaking distance. On board the Patriot the firemen were using oil, lard, butter, and even bacon, with woody for the purpose of raising the steam to its highest pitch. The blaze mingled with the black smoke that issued from the pipes of the other boat, which showed that she also was burning something more combustible than wood. The firemen of both boats, who were slaves, were singing songs such as can only be heard on board a southern steamer. The boats now came abreast of each other, and nearer, until they were locked so that men could pass from one to the other. The wildest excitement prevailed among the men employed on the steamers, in which the passengers freely participated. The Patriot now stopped to take in passengers, but still no steam was permitted to escape. On the starting of the boat, again, cold water was forced into the boilers by the feed pumps, and, as might have been expected, one of the boilers exploded with terrific force, carrying away the boiler deck and tearing to pieces much of the machinery. One dense fog of steam filled every part of the vessel, while shrieks, groans,